On February 19, 1943, American forces under Major General Lloyd Fredendall's II Corps held defensive positions along Kasserine Pass in central Tunisia. This marked the United States Army's first direct ground confrontation with Germany's veteran field forces. Overall Allied command rested with General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Opposing them were experienced German commanders, including Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and General Hans-Eugen von Arnim, officers shaped by years of mobile warfare across Europe and North Africa. When German panzer units attacked, the imbalance became immediate. Rommel's armor and artillery advanced with speed and coordination, exploiting weaknesses in American deployment. Fredendall's fragmented command structure, operating from a distant headquarters, failed to react in time. Communications collapsed. Units withdrew without clear orders. Within days, U.S. forces suffered heavy losses in men, tanks, and morale, marking the first undeniable battlefield defeat of the American Army in the Second World War. In Berlin, reports from Tunisia confirmed long-standing assumptions. Hitler's headquarters viewed Kasserine as proof that American troops lacked combat discipline and effective leadership. To German planners, the United States appeared unready for sustained land warfare against the Wehrmacht. What they did not yet see was the response forming on the Allied side. Eisenhower would soon remove commanders, reorganize the shattered force, and turn to a general known for restoring discipline under pressure. Within weeks, George S. Patton would be placed in command, not to erase the defeat at Kasserine Pass, but to ensure it would never happen again. By the time American troops reached Tunisia, the war had already carved deep scars across 3 continents. In November 1942, the United States entered ground combat in North Africa through Operation Torch, a massive amphibious landing in Morocco and Algeria. The objective was clear: trap Axis forces in Tunisia between advancing Allied armies from the west and the British Eighth Army pushing east after victory at El Alamein. On paper, the plan looked decisive. In reality, the American army arriving in North Africa was untested. Its soldiers were well-equipped but inexperienced. Its officers were learning coalition warfare in real time. Command structures were still evolving, and doctrine remained influenced by peacetime assumptions rather than battlefield reality. The U.S. II Corps, commanded by Major General Lloyd Fredendall, was scattered across wide defensive positions, reflecting a belief that firepower and distance could substitute for cohesion and depth. Across the front, the German situation was more complex than it appeared. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps was retreating westward after defeat in Egypt, while fresh German units under General Hans-Eugen von Arnim defended Tunisia itself. Though strained by supply shortages and Allied air attacks, these forces retained something the Americans lacked: combat memory. German units understood how to coordinate armor, infantry, artillery, and air support under pressure. For Adolf Hitler, Tunisia represented more than territory. It was a chance to hold the central Mediterranean, threaten Allied shipping lanes, and delay an eventual invasion of Europe. German intelligence assessed the new American formations cautiously at first, but early skirmishes suggested vulnerability. Reports described slow reactions, rigid command, and an over-reliance on equipment rather than maneuver. As winter settled over the Atlas Mountains, both sides maneuvered for advantage. The Americans believed they were stabilizing a defensive line. The Germans saw an opening. Between them lay Kasserine Pass, a narrow corridor through rough terrain that would soon become the testing ground for 2 very different armies, and the place where theory would finally collide with reality. By early February 1943, the Allied advance in Tunisia had slowed to a halt. Logistical strain, poor roads, and winter weather stretched American and British units thin. The U.S. II Corps occupied a wide sector along the western edge of the Atlas Mountains, tasked with guarding multiple passes that controlled access to the Tunisian interior. Among them, Kasserine Pass stood out, not because it was heavily fortified, but because it was not. It was defended lightly, based on the assumption that rugged terrain alone would delay any major armored thrust. Major General Lloyd Fredendall believed dispersed positions would reduce vulnerability to German attack. His headquarters was located far behind the front lines, deep in the mountains, limiting his ability to sense the battlefield in real time. Orders traveled slowly. Situational awareness suffered. Subordinate commanders often acted without clear guidance, reinforcing a fragmented defensive posture. German commanders saw opportunity. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, seeking to regain momentum after setbacks in Libya, advocated a concentrated strike against American forces to seize supplies, disrupt Allied coordination, and buy time for Axis defenses in Tunisia. General Hans-Eugen von Arnim supported limited offensive action, confident that the Americans could be pushed aside with decisive force. Though German command disagreements existed, both men recognized the same weakness, an opponent still learning how to fight a modern war. On February 14, German forces struck first at Sidi Bouzid, smashing exposed American positions east of Kasserine. The engagement confirmed what German reconnaissance had suggested. U.S. armored units were defeated in detail. Air support was poorly coordinated. Artillery was underutilized. Within days, the road to Kasserine Pass lay open. What followed was not an accident or sudden failure. It was the predictable result of doctrine-meeting experience. The Americans believed time and space could compensate for inexperience. The Germans believed speed and concentration could shatter that illusion. As German columns began moving west toward Kasserine, the battle ceased to be theoretical. It became unavoidable, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose every flaw and every potential within the American army. For the American soldiers holding the approaches to Kasserine Pass, the battle represented a brutal awakening. Many were young, recently trained, and confronting combat for the first time. They possessed modern equipment and numerical strength, but little understanding of how quickly a battlefield could unravel. When German artillery began falling and tanks appeared through mountain gaps, fear spread faster than orders. Major General Lloyd Fredendall's command style magnified these vulnerabilities. Operating from a headquarters far removed from the front, he relied heavily on reports rather than observation. Orders were often unclear, late, or contradictory. Subordinate commanders lacked authority to adapt quickly when situations changed. In contrast, German leadership emphasized initiative. Officers at lower levels were expected to act decisively within the intent of the mission. This difference in command philosophy would prove decisive in the opening days of the battle. From the German perspective, Kasserine was an opportunity to confirm assumptions already forming in Berlin. German units approaching the pass had fought British forces for years and understood how to exploit hesitation. They recognized American firepower, but also sensed uncertainty. The enemy in front of them did not maneuver fluidly, did not counterattack quickly, and did not yet fight as an integrated force. For German commanders, the early success at Kasserine reinforced a dangerous belief that the United States Army could be beaten with the same methods used against earlier opponents. On February 19, 1943, the German attack began in earnest. Erwin Rommel's panzer divisions advanced through the narrow corridors of Kasserine Pass with the precision of a force long accustomed to mobile warfare. Infantry followed behind, artillery firing in calculated bursts to soften positions. For the inexperienced American II Corps under Major General Lloyd Fredendall, the assault was overwhelming from the outset. Defensive positions crumbled under concentrated fire, and units became isolated in the rocky mountain passes. American armored counterattacks were poorly coordinated. Many tanks were deployed piecemeal, moving in small groups unable to support one another against the massed German armor. Communications failures meant that Fredendall's orders often reached the front late or not at all. By late morning, entire regiments had fallen back, abandoning artillery and vehicles that could not be moved quickly enough through the rough terrain. Rommel's advance created pockets of confusion and panic. Soldiers at every level struggled to maintain cohesion. Despite isolated acts of courage, including small groups holding ridges for hours against superior firepower, the U.S. II Corps suffered heavy losses in men, equipment, and morale. By February 20, reports indicated that American forces had been decisively driven back from key positions along the pass. German troops captured supply depots and critical crossroads, gaining both material and psychological advantage. The battle exposed weaknesses in American planning and leadership, but it also illuminated the capacity for rapid adaptation. Commanders observing the collapse began identifying points of resistance, units capable of reorganization, and the limits of German logistical reach. While Kasserine Pass appeared at first to be a complete German victory, the seeds of a counter-response were already taking root, a response that would reshape the American army in Tunisia and beyond. As February 20 progressed, German momentum began to encounter limits. Rommel's units, though tactically superior, faced stretched supply lines, fuel shortages, and the rugged terrain of central Tunisia. Panzer divisions advanced with aggression, but every kilometer deeper into Kasserine revealed the fragility of their operational reach. Meanwhile, American units, battered but not broken, began to regroup under the initiative of lower-level officers and emerging battlefield leaders. Eisenhower, alarmed by reports of collapse, acted swiftly. Major General Patton was ordered to take command of the II Corps front, arriving in the field with a reputation for discipline and aggressive tactics. Patton's presence injected clarity and coordination. He reorganized defensive positions, consolidated scattered units, and established direct lines of command, ensuring that counterattacks would be rapid and coordinated. For the first time, the Americans began to contest German advances not as disorganized defenders, but as an army capable of coordinated action. By February 22, German forces, despite initial success, faced mounting resistance. American artillery, now better directed, began inflicting significant losses on advancing tanks. Infantry units fortified ridges and chokepoints, slowing armored thrusts. German reconnaissance reported unexpected resistance and casualties that were higher than anticipated. While Rommel retained local superiority in many engagements, it became clear that further advances would be costly. The clash at Kasserine Pass was not a German disaster, but it was no longer a clean victory. The Americans had learned quickly under fire, identifying both weaknesses and potential. The decisive moment had passed, not in a single breakthrough, but in the intersection of German overreach and American adaptation. By the time the dust settled, Kasserine had become a crucible, a place where initial defeat would force the United States Army to transform, and where Hitler's confidence in America's battlefield inexperience would begin to erode. The immediate toll of Kasserine Pass was severe. American forces suffered over 6,000 casualties, including killed, wounded, and captured. Tanks, artillery pieces, and vehicles were abandoned or destroyed in the mountains, representing both a material and psychological blow. Entire units, untested under fire, had collapsed or withdrawn under pressure. For the men in the field, the battle was a bitter introduction to the realities of modern mechanized warfare. Command failures became impossible to ignore. Major General Fredendall, criticized for his distant headquarters and poor coordination, was relieved of his command shortly after the engagement. Eisenhower, confronted with the stark evidence of leadership deficiencies, recognized that the II Corps required immediate restructuring. The removal of Fredendall was both symbolic and practical, a statement that inexperience and indecision could no longer dictate outcomes on the battlefield. Into this vacuum stepped General George S. Patton, a man with a reputation for rigor, discipline, and tactical clarity. Patton's arrival marked a turning point not only for II Corps but for the American Army in North Africa. he immediately implemented stringent organizational reforms, consolidating scattered units, standardizing communications, and instilling aggressive counterattack principles. Morale, previously shattered, began to stabilize under a command structure that demanded competence, responsiveness, and initiative. Meanwhile, German forces did not exploit the victory to its full potential. Supply shortages, overextended lines, and the logistical limits of moving armor through mountainous terrain slowed further advances. Although Rommel and von Arnim had demonstrated tactical brilliance in the initial days, they faced the same strategic constraints that had challenged all armies in North Africa. What appeared to be a decisive blow became, instead, a temporary tactical success that exposed German vulnerability over time. Kasserine Pass, in this sense, was a defining moment for both sides. For Germany, it reinforced confidence in their ability to defeat American forces in open engagement. For the United States, it revealed the structural, tactical, and psychological flaws that had to be addressed. Lessons learned on these rocky slopes would shape the conduct of American forces in Tunisia, and the reforms initiated by Patton would ripple through subsequent campaigns, laying the foundation for a more effective and battle-ready army. Kasserine Pass remains a defining moment in the history of the United States Army. It was a place where inexperience collided with veteran skill, and where organizational flaws were exposed under the harshest conditions of modern war. For a nation confident in its industrial might but untested on the battlefield, the loss was humbling. Soldiers died, equipment was lost, and reputations were questioned. But from that crucible emerged a force capable of adaptation, learning, and growth. The arrival of Patton and the reforms he implemented illustrate a universal principle of warfare. Defeat can be as instructive as victory. Kasserine forced the army to confront its weaknesses, communication breakdowns, command failures, tactical inexperience, and to correct them rapidly. It revealed the importance of leadership present on the battlefield, the value of cohesion and initiative, and the necessity of integrating infantry, armor, and artillery into coordinated operations. The lessons learned would reverberate through subsequent campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and ultimately Europe. For the Germans, Kasserine offered immediate tactical success, but also highlighted the limits of even the most skilled commanders when facing an opponent capable of rapid transformation. Hitler's assumption that the Americans were fragile and easily defeated began to erode, as Rommel and his officers reported on the adaptability and growing competence of U.S. forces. The initial victory, therefore, was temporary. The strategic balance was already shifting. Kasserine Pass reminds us that warfare is never static. Success can mask vulnerability, and failure can ignite evolution. For the United States, the battle forged the Army's capacity to fight effectively in large-scale mechanized war. It transformed fear and disarray into discipline and confidence. And while the mountains of Tunisia bore witness to American defeat, they also witnessed the first steps toward the army that would eventually march across Europe, turning initial humiliation into enduring strength.